So today's discussion is kind of an open-ended one. I don't really think we're going to come to any conclusions today, but I do want to have a conversation. I want to share some of my thoughts with you and also hear what you guys have to say as well. Because, I've been thinking about this kind of on my own, not really talking to you guys about it, not much at least. But it wasn't until a recent conversation that we had over at the Grand Floridian that I was like, oh, you guys are thinking this too. So I figure maybe we can focus in a little bit on it, share some thoughts, and I don't know, just talk about it. Like I said, it's open-ended. I don't know that we're going to come to any conclusions, but we can sure chat. So first, let's all get on the same page, okay? So the other day, we went over to the Grand Floridian, like I said, and we were looking at some of the construction because there's a lot of work that's being done over there right now. If this is your first time hearing about this, I'm sure you might be like, yeah, there's been a lot of work happening there nonstop for as long as I can remember. And that is true, but they have moved to the lobby. Like, they're really working on the lobby now. And that's included removing that bird cage that's in the Grand Floridian lobby. They've actually since removed the whole platform that it was on. I mean, it was still there last time we visited, but work is moving over there. So maybe we have to go back and check it out again. Anyway, if you're not familiar with this bird cage, it's kind of opposite the elevators, or in between two sets of elevators. It's like right in the middle of the lobby. And they're removing the birdcage, or they removed the birdcage with the intention of replacing that with a bar in the lobby of the Grand Floridian. Now, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about this for a lot of different reasons, but one that immediately came to mind for me and came to mind for a lot of you guys as well is, seriously, another bar? And that's kind of where we're focusing our discussion today. Now, before we jump in, I just want to let everyone know my position when it comes to alcohol consumption. You do you. I have no problem with the consumption of alcohol. Honestly, I don't have any problems with the sale of alcohol in the parks. Theoretically, I don't really want to get into a tangent about that, at least not right now. But the point that I'm trying to get at is I'm not a square, I'm not a prude, I'm not opposed to alcohol or alcohol consumption in any way. Honestly, like I mentioned, I'm not even opposed to alcohol being sold in the parks. And I know that there are a lot of Disney purists out there who are going to reference something that Walt wanted or Walt said. That's not this channel. I'm not a historian or anything like that. I'm sure that there are other people out there who can go into the details and give you more information about that. It's just not me, okay? And I also recognize, which I say all the time, that times are a-changin', and sometimes that means that what was once acceptable is no longer acceptable, or whatever the case may be, right? So, I'm not even going to get into that can of worms today. But I do pay attention to patterns, habits, things like that, things that are relevant to travelers so that I can talk to you about stuff like this and we can ultimately do whatever it is that we do. But yeah, I talk about that all the time. Anyway, and I'm noticing this trend at Walt Disney World, specifically this trend that leans in really hard to alcohol consumption, which is fine. Like I said, not opposed to it. But I do think that it's an interesting choice, especially when there are so many of these lounges, bars, and alcohol-centric spaces popping up throughout the theme parks. And of course, like at the Grand Floridian, the resorts. Now, like I said, Grand Floridian's putting this bar in the lobby, which honestly is an interesting choice. Some of you commented another bar at Disney World. Is that really necessary? But one of the things, if you zoom in a little bit, another bar in the Grand Floridian lobby, is that really necessary? Because there is a bar on the second floor, the Enchanted Rose. I mean, it's a lounge, same thing. And that is just, it seems excessive. It's just an interesting choice, right? So that makes this new bar, the second bar in this space, And I can't imagine that they're going to get rid of the Enchanted Rose. I mean, it's relatively new, so it seems like an interesting choice. But that's far from the only bar/lounge thing that's available at Walt Disney World, or that's going to be available at Walt Disney World, right? We have that lounge opening up in the Spaceship Earth building. What is it called? Geo 82 or something? I don't know the name off the top of my head, so bear with me. And then there's that pirate bar / lounge opening up at Magic Kingdom, which I'm sure people have a lot to say about because alcohol in Magic Kingdom has always been like a hot button issue. And all of these are seemingly popping up at Walt Disney World or are scheduled to open up at Walt Disney World all in like one push. And it's such an interesting choice, in my opinion. It seems like a choice that someone made who, I don't know if they're taking into consideration what not only their current target audience or their current target market, whatever you want to call it, but also the future target audience. I'm not sure they're taking into consideration what their wants and needs are, which is something that probably sounds like we've said before. I know some of you have communicated this in some of our past discussions as well, that it's almost like Disney doesn't know who their audience is, who they're talking to, who they're trying to, grab onto so that they can continue this legacy of doing whatever it is that they're doing. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, well, hold on a second. There's no doubt people like to drink. And you're right. People do like to drink. People like to sit down, consume alcohol, and splurge, especially when they're on vacation. But one of the things that I find interesting that's kind of like a little tidbit that runs parallel to this discussion is what the habits and trends are of the younger, in air quotes, generation. Generally speaking, this generation is referred to as Gen Z. I hate using this term, this blanket term for an entire chunk of people. It doesn't represent people appropriately. I don't like stereotypes and blanket statements when it comes to stuff like this. So this is not a choice on my behalf as much as it is just repeating what is being discussed. But it seems like people from the age of 18 to 34, their habits are changing, especially when it comes to alcohol consumption. I looked up some stats about this before I left, and it's something like a 10% decrease in the number of people who consume alcohol between, again, the ages of 18 and 34. And less than 50% of people in a similar age bracket have consumed any alcohol in the last month. Now, I know that that's not really a great representation of the bigger picture, right? Especially when we're only looking at a very specific age bracket. But I do think it's an important little tidbit of information, and one that I've heard when it comes to other things as well. Not too long ago, there was this whole kerfuffle in the wine industry because they were seeing such a major drop in sales because younger people aren't drinking. And I'm sure that if we took the time to research, we could find other examples of this as well. So I do think that that's interesting, kind of on its own. And then, of course, there are going to be people who say, well, Gen Z, this age bracket, the younger folk, they're not the only people who are vacationing. They're not the only people visiting Walt Disney World. And that's true. But we can't ignore that they are the next generation of people who will be at Walt Disney World if they're not already. And I don't just mean Walt Disney World. They're the next generation of adults, right? Doing things, spending money, all of that. And so I think it's really important for businesses to not just cast them off as easily as they sometimes do. I mean, goodness knows everyone casts off the upcoming generation, the younger generation as any number of things, what do they know? They're just the kids. But I do think that this all is kind of interesting when you pull it all together. And it really does make me wonder, again, like we've been talking about here and there, who is the target audience? What is the market that Disney is speaking to, especially with some of these decisions? Or is it that the decision makers, they're outdated, maybe a little too old to be making the decisions that they're making? And maybe they feel the repercussions of that later. So that's one little tidbit that I just want to leave there. Like I said, open-ended. I don't really have any answers for you. It's just stuff that's going through my head that I wanted to share. But on the other hand, and another thing that I think is particularly interesting, something that maybe those of you who have commented about this before have been thinking is there's also a very specific, what do you want to call it? It's a very specific mindset, for lack of a better word, of people who go to Disney. Yeah, there are some people who like to go to the parks and get hammered, just go to Epcot on a Friday or Saturday night. But there are other people who are bringing their families to these family-friendly vacation destinations, and they're looking for just that, a place that they can comfortably be with their family and not a frat house, which is a problem that we see at Disney whether we like to admit it or not, especially in certain environments. This is especially true at Epcot with the drinking around the world situation that gets out of hand sometimes. And I can't help but wonder if this is something that is going to extend beyond Epcot, especially with more bars, lounges, and stuff like that. Sure, it's not quite the same thing because you would have to travel further and all of that, right? But still, it makes me think. And again, to be clear, like a little disclaimer here, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that like frat house club environment, that like adults doing adult things type place, but time and place. This is not the place, and often not the time. And I can't imagine that I feel alone in that, I can't imagine that I'm the only person who's like, wow, this gets out of hand. Wow, this is not where I would bring my kids. But again, I don't know. So I'd love to hear from you guys. If you've ever felt that way, if there's anything that you steer clear of because this is an environment that you're just not comfortable with. Of course, keeping in mind that everyone has a different way of doing things and everyone has a different level of comfort when it comes to this type of thing. But with so many people, at least from my perspective, and I could be wrong here, right? Like just thoughts popping around my noggin. I can't help but wonder, like, what was the thought process behind this decision? Part of me is like, money, easy answer. And I'm sure that some of you are already working your fingers to type that in the comments. And I'm sure you're right, like without a doubt, finances and the ability to make money was part of this decision. But at the same time, there are a lot of other things that Disney could have done where they left money on the table. Like over at Epcot with that new Welcome Home Center in the Canada Pavilion. Like I'm sure that they would have had a better return on investment if they had put a bar or a lounge in there than they ever will making that a Disney Vacation Club preview center. Not to say that they don't make a lot of money off DVC, that's true, but how much money are they going to make off DVC because they have that preview center right there in the Canada Pavilion? Probably not a lot, but that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, like I said, open-ended discussion, just some thoughts that are popping through my head, and I wanted to share them with you. And mostly, I wanted to hear what you guys have to say. What is your position on the amount of alcohol-centric things that are happening at Walt Disney World right now? Do you like it? Do you not like it? If it's something that you're a fan of, are you a fan of the way that they do some of what they do? For example, the lounge that they're opening up at Magic Kingdom, at least to me, seems like it's going to be very similar to Oga's Cantina over at Hollywood Studios, which is an environment with shared tables, often very uncomfortable for guests, and having smaller parties like just myself and Russ, steering clear because it's just not a fun environment to be in. Or are you someone who is like, I don't understand what they're doing. I don't get it. Whatever the case, I want to hear your thoughts in a comment down below. But yeah, I think that's about all. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about this. I know it's not the most exciting of adventures, but it's a lot to think about. And I'm glad I have someone to toss some ideas out at. And hopefully you can share some of your thoughts and ideas or, just whatever's going through your head with me in a comment down below. Like I said, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But for now, I'm heading out. See you guys next time. Till then, bye.